My name is Deborah Payne, and at 64 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I witnessed on that cold February afternoon in my own home in Rochester, New York. It was supposed to be a celebration. My husband Richard and I had planned a romantic getaway to Niagara Falls to commemorate our 40th wedding anniversary. After 3 years of watching him struggle with paralysis from the waist down following a devastating stroke, I thought we both deserved a moment of peace and joy. The doctors had said travel would be good for his spirits, and I had spent weeks planning every detail, every accommodation he would need. But fate had other plans. A massive snowstorm grounded all flights, and our carefully orchestrated trip was canceled at the last minute. Disappointed but determined to make the best of it, I decided to surprise Richard by coming home early. Maybe we could still celebrate our anniversary together, just the two of us, in the comfort of our own home where he felt most secure. I had given Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, the week off from her usual caregiving duties. She had been such a blessing over the past 3 years, helping me care for Richard when the physical and emotional toll became overwhelming. My son Marcus worked long hours as a construction foreman, often away for days at a time, and Vanessa's presence had been a godsend. She was young, energetic, and seemed genuinely devoted to helping our family through this difficult time. The house was unusually quiet when I inserted my key into the front door. I expected to find Richard in his wheelchair in the living room, probably watching one of his favorite old movies, or perhaps napping. Instead, I heard something that made my heart skip a beat. Laughter. Not just any laughter, but the intimate, breathless kind that belonged in private moments between lovers. The sound was coming from our bedroom, mine and Richard's bedroom. My hands trembled as I set down my suitcase and crept toward the partially open door. Every instinct told me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I had never heard anything. But I couldn't stop myself from looking through that crack in the door. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was Vanessa, my 35-year-old daughter-in-law, straddling my paralyzed husband's lap in his wheelchair. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, and she was moving against him in a way that left no question about what was happening. Richard's hands gripped her waist, his face alive with an expression I hadn't seen in years, not since before his stroke had stolen so much from both of us. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they would hear it, but they were lost in their own world, completely oblivious to my presence. That's when I heard the words that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. "I can't wait until the old woman is finally gone," Vanessa whispered against Richard's ear, her voice dripping with venom. "Then we won't have to pretend anymore. All that money she's been spending on your care, it should be ours. We deserve it, after everything we've had to endure with her." Richard's response shattered what was left of my world. "Soon, my love. The insurance policy is worth $750,000, and with her heart condition, it won't be long now. We just have to be patient a little while longer." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, fighting back the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. These two people, the husband I had loved and cared for through sickness and health, and the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into our family with open arms, were planning my death. They weren't just having an affair, they were counting the days until they could cash in on my life insurance policy. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. For 3 years, I had sacrificed everything to care for Richard, spending our retirement savings of nearly $200,000 on specialized equipment, treatments, and home modifications. I had worked extra shifts as a part-time nurse well into my 60s to make ends meet. And Vanessa, sweet, helpful Vanessa, had been playing the part of the devoted daughter-in-law while plotting my demise. As I watched them together, I realized that my entire world had been built on lies. But in that moment of devastation, something else began to grow inside me. A cold, calculated determination. If they thought Deborah Payne was going to lie down and die quietly, they were about to learn just how wrong they could be. If you're watching this and wondering what happened next, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I need to know I'm not alone in this fight. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Knowing that people around the world are listening gives me the strength to continue sharing this story. Because what happens next will shock you even more than what I've already revealed. The trembling in my hands wouldn't stop as I quietly backed away from the bedroom door. Every fiber of my being wanted to burst into that room and confront them, to scream until my voice gave out, to demand answers for this unspeakable betrayal. But something deeper, a survival instinct honed by 64 years of life, told me to stay silent, to observe, to plan. I crept back to the front door and carefully retrieved my suitcase, my movements deliberate and silent. If I was going to survive this, I needed them to believe I knew nothing. I needed time to process what I had discovered and figure out how to protect myself from the two people I had trusted most in the world. Taking a deep breath to compose myself, I opened the front door again, this time making sure it closed with enough noise to announce my arrival. "Richard, honey, I'm home," I called out in the cheerful voice I had perfected over 4 decades of marriage. "The storm canceled our trip, but maybe we can make our own romantic evening right here." The scrambling sounds from the bedroom were immediate and frantic. I could hear Vanessa's muffled voice, the rustle of clothing being hastily adjusted, and Richard's wheelchair moving across the floor. By the time I reached the bedroom doorway, Vanessa was smoothing down her hair, and Richard was positioned innocently near the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard. "Oh, Mrs. Payne!" Vanessa exclaimed, her face flushed, but her smile perfectly innocent. "I didn't expect you back so soon. I was just helping Richard with some physical therapy exercises the doctor recommended. You know how he gets restless when he's been sitting too long?" The lie rolled off her tongue so effortlessly that I almost admired her skill. Almost. "That's wonderful, dear," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. "I'm so grateful for everything you do for us. You're like the daughter I never had." The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. Here was this woman I had welcomed into my family, whom I had paid $3,000 a month to help care for my husband, and she was plotting my murder while committing adultery in my own bed. Richard wheeled himself toward me, his expression a masterpiece of feigned affection. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry about the trip. We'll reschedule as soon as the weather clears up." He reached for my hand, the same hand that had been gripping Vanessa's waist just minutes earlier. "How was your drive back? The roads looked treacherous." "Oh, you know me," I said, leaning down to kiss his forehead while my stomach churned with revulsion. "I've driven through worse storms than this. Besides, I couldn't wait to get home to my husband." I looked directly into his eyes as I said it, searching for any sign of guilt or shame. There was none. Only the practiced warmth of a man who had been lying to me for God knows how long. Vanessa gathered her coat and purse, preparing to leave. "I should head home to Marcus. He'll be worried about me driving in this weather." Another lie, considering Marcus was working a 3-day job in Buffalo and wouldn't be home until Friday. I knew this because I had been keeping track of everyone's schedules, trying to coordinate Richard's care around our busy family life. "Of course, dear," I said. "Drive safely. We'll see you tomorrow." "Actually," Vanessa paused at the bedroom doorway, "I was thinking I might take a few days off. You're home now, and I'm sure you two want some time alone together for your anniversary." The way she said it, with that slight emphasis on alone, made my skin crawl. Was she already putting their plan into motion? How long had they been waiting for the perfect opportunity? After Vanessa left, I helped Richard with his evening routine, transferring him to bed, administering his medications, and setting up his night table with water and the emergency call button. The entire time, I maintained the facade of the loving, devoted wife while my mind raced with questions and fears. "Deborah," Richard said softly as I tucked the covers around him, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me these past 3 years. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know you've sacrificed more than anyone should have to." The sincerity in his voice was so convincing that for a moment I almost wondered if I had imagined the scene in the bedroom. But then I remembered Vanessa's words, the old woman, and the cold calculation in Richard's voice as he discussed my life insurance policy. "That's what marriage is about," I replied, smoothing his graying hair. "In sickness and in health, remember? I made that promise 40 years ago, and I meant every word." He squeezed my hand. "I love you, Deborah. Don't ever forget that." Those words should have warmed my heart. Instead, they felt like ice water in my veins. Because I now knew the truth. Richard didn't love me. He loved my life insurance money. He loved the idea of a future with Vanessa, funded by my death, and somehow I was going to have to find a way to stop them without losing everything I had worked so hard to build. As I turned off the bedroom light and whispered goodnight, I realized that my real fight was just beginning. These two thought they were dealing with a frail, trusting old woman who would never suspect their treachery. They were about to discover that Deborah Payne had more fight left in her than they could possibly imagine. That night, sleep eluded me completely. I lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, while my mind replayed every interaction I'd had with Richard and Vanessa over the past 3 years. How many signs had I missed? How long had this betrayal been festering right under my nose? By 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep and crept downstairs to my home office. If there were secrets in my house, I was going to find them. I started with Richard's computer, the same laptop I had bought him to help with his recovery, thinking it would give him a sense of purpose and connection to the world. His password was easy enough to guess: our wedding anniversary. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me as I typed in those numbers and gained access to what I soon discovered was a treasure trove of deception. The email account I found buried in his browser history made my blood run cold. For 8 months, Richard and Vanessa had been exchanging messages that ranged from passionate love letters to detailed discussions about our family's finances. But it was the email thread titled Insurance Information that truly terrified me. In meticulous detail, they had researched every aspect of my life insurance policy. They knew the exact payout amount, the waiting periods, the beneficiary information, everything. But most chilling of all, they had been discussing ways to accelerate the timeline. One email from Vanessa, dated just 2 weeks earlier, read, "The stress of caring for you is really taking a toll on her heart. Dr. Mitchell mentioned at her last appointment that she needs to be careful. Maybe if we increase the stress levels gradually, nature would take its course more quickly. We can't wait forever, and Marcus is starting to ask questions about why I'm here so much." Richard's response was even more calculated. "I've been thinking about that too. Maybe it's time to introduce some additional financial pressure. If she thinks we're facing a medical crisis that insurance won't cover, it might push her over the edge. You know how she worries about money." My hands shook as I continued reading. They had been monitoring my health, discussing my heart condition with clinical detachment, and actively plotting ways to worsen my stress levels. The woman I had been paying $36,000 a year to help care for my husband had been using that intimate access to plan my death. But the emails revealed something else, something that made me realize just how deep this betrayal went. Marcus, my own son, wasn't as innocent as I had believed. In an email exchange from 3 months ago, Vanessa had written to Richard, "I told Marcus about us last night. I thought he'd be furious, but he surprised me. He said he's been watching his dad deteriorate for years, and if this makes you happy, then maybe it's for the best. He even suggested that once his mother is gone, we could all live together as a real family. The insurance money would be enough for all of us to start fresh somewhere warm, maybe Florida or Arizona." Richard's response had been immediate. "I knew Marcus was a good boy. He understands that sometimes love finds us in unexpected ways. Once we have the $750,000, we can all have the life we deserve. Deborah will finally be at peace, and we can stop pretending." I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My own son, the boy I had raised, loved, and supported through every challenge life had thrown at him, was complicit in planning my death. The 3 of them had turned my family into a conspiracy against me. But as devastating as this discovery was, it also gave me something I hadn't had before: knowledge. I now knew exactly what I was up against, and I could use that information to protect myself. I spent the next several hours printing out every email, every document, every piece of evidence I could find. I created backup copies on a flash drive that I hid in my jewelry box. If something happened to me, I wanted there to be a record of what these 3 had planned. When Richard woke up around 9 a.m., I was back in character, the loving, devoted wife bringing him breakfast in bed and asking about his physical therapy schedule. But inside, I was formulating a plan of my own. "I've been thinking," I said, as I helped him into his wheelchair. "Maybe we should update our wills and insurance policies. Make sure everything is in order, especially with your health situation." The flash of panic in his eyes was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. "Why would we need to do that now? Everything's fine the way it is." "Oh, I know," I said lightly. "But I've been reading about estate planning, and there are some new tax advantages we might be able to take advantage of. Plus, I want to make sure Marcus and Vanessa are properly taken care of if anything happens to us." Richard relaxed slightly. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you think is best. What he didn't know was that I had already called our family attorney that morning and scheduled an appointment for the following week. But I wasn't planning to update our beneficiaries. I was planning to remove them entirely. If Richard, Vanessa, and Marcus thought they were going to profit from my death, they had seriously underestimated Deborah Payne. As I helped Richard with his morning routine, I realized that I was no longer the naive, trusting woman I had been just 24 hours earlier. These three had turned me into someone I barely recognized, someone capable of deception, strategic thinking, and cold calculation. But if that's what it was going to take to survive, then that's exactly who I would become. Monday morning arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood as I drove through the slushy streets of Rochester to the law office of Davidson Klein and Associates. I had told Richard I was going shopping for groceries, another lie in what was becoming a web of necessary deceptions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was learning to deceive from the masters of manipulation living under my own roof. Harold Davidson had been our family attorney for over 20 years. A distinguished man in his 70s, he had handled our home purchases, Richard's business contracts back when he owned his accounting firm, and all of our estate planning documents. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was Harold. "Deborah," Harold said, rising from his mahogany desk as his secretary ushered me into his office. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right? You sounded distressed on the phone." I had rehearsed this moment, but sitting across from Harold's kind, concerned face, I nearly broke down. "Harold, I need to ask you something confidential, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Richard been here recently? Has he asked about our insurance policies or tried to make any changes to our wills?" Harold's expression grew serious. He leaned back in his leather chair, choosing his words carefully. "Deborah, I can't discuss another client's business, even if that client is your husband. But I can tell you that if someone were planning to make changes to shared policies or documents, both parties would typically need to be present. But what if they just wanted information? What if they were asking hypothetical questions about beneficiaries or payout procedures?" Harold studied my face for a long moment. "Deborah, what's really going on here? You're scaring me." That's when I broke down and told him everything. I pulled out the printed emails, the financial records I had discovered, and the detailed plans that Richard and Vanessa had been making. Harold's face grew paler with each piece of evidence I presented. "My God," he whispered when I finished. "Deborah, this isn't just adultery or family drama. What you're describing could constitute conspiracy to commit fraud, and if they're actually planning to harm you—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "So what can I do? How do I protect myself?" Harold was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the documents I had brought. Finally, he looked up. "First, we need to change your beneficiaries immediately. If something happens to you, we can't let these people profit from it. Second, we need to document everything, create an official record of what you've discovered. And third," he hesitated. "Third, I think you need to consider involving the police." The thought of involving law enforcement terrified me. "Harold, what if I'm wrong? What if there's an innocent explanation for all of this? Richard is my husband of 40 years. Marcus is my son. I can't just destroy their lives based on suspicion." "Deborah," Harold said gently, "these aren't suspicions. These are documented plans to defraud an insurance company and potentially harm you. The emails you've shown me constitute evidence of criminal conspiracy." We spent the next 2 hours restructuring my entire estate. I changed the beneficiary on my $750,000 life insurance policy from Richard to a charitable foundation for stroke victims, a delicious irony that wasn't lost on either of us. I updated my will to leave the bulk of my assets to various charities, with only small memorial bequests for my family members. But Harold's most important suggestion was what he called insurance. "I want you to write a detailed letter explaining everything you've discovered," he said. "Date it, have it notarized, and I'll keep it in my safe. If anything happens to you, anything at all, that letter will immediately go to the police and the insurance company. It's your protection policy." As I drove home, I felt a strange mixture of empowerment and terror. I had taken concrete steps to protect myself, but I also knew that I was now living in a house with 3 people who were counting the days until my death. That afternoon, Vanessa arrived for her regular shift, bright and cheerful as always. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Payne? You look tired." "Oh, just the usual aches and pains of getting older," I replied, watching her face carefully. Although my heart has been acting up a bit more lately. Dr. Mitchell says it's probably just stress. The flash of interest in Vanessa's eyes was unmistakable. Stress? What kind of stress? Maybe there's something I can do to help. You're so sweet to offer, dear. It's just the usual worries. Finances, Richard's care, wondering what the future holds for all of us. Vanessa moved closer, her voice filled with false concern. You know, Mrs. Payne, maybe you're trying to do too much. Taking care of someone with Richard's needs is a young person's job. Have you thought about, maybe, letting others take on more responsibility? The suggestion hung in the air between us, innocent on the surface, but loaded with sinister implications. She was already starting to plant seeds, trying to convince me to step back from Richard's care so she could have more access, more control, more opportunity to implement their plan. I appreciate the offer, Vanessa, but taking care of Richard is my job as his wife. It's a responsibility I take very seriously. That evening, as I helped Richard with his dinner, he brought up our conversation about estate planning again. Have you thought more about updating our policies, sweetheart? I don't want you to worry about unnecessary paperwork. Actually, I have an appointment with Harold Davidson next week, I said. I think it's important to make sure everything is in order. The look that passed between Richard and Vanessa, sitting across the room but clearly listening to every word, told me everything I needed to know. They thought I was playing right into their hands, making their eventual inheritance even easier to claim. If only they knew that Deborah Payne was already 3 steps ahead of them. The knock on my door came at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, unexpected and urgent. When I opened it, I found Marcus standing on my porch, his construction clothes dirty, and his face wearing an expression I had never seen before. Cold, calculated, and somehow older than his 37 years. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." My heart began racing. In all the years since Marcus had grown up and moved out, he had never shown up unannounced like this. Something had changed, and I suspected I knew what it was. "Of course, honey," I said, maintaining my facade of the loving mother. "Let me make you some coffee. You look exhausted." "I'm fine," he said curtly, following me into the kitchen. "Where's Dad?" "He's resting in the bedroom. His physical therapy session wore him out today." I busied myself with the coffee maker, using the time to study Marcus's reflection in the chrome surface. His jaw was set in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of his father. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot lately about Dad's situation. About your situation. About all of us." I turned to face him, cup in hand. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Marcus looked around the kitchen where I had made him countless meals, helped him with homework, bandaged his scraped knees, and celebrated his achievements. The kitchen where he was now about to break my heart completely. "I mean that maybe it's time to face some hard truths. Dad's never going to get better. The doctors have been clear about that, and you're killing yourself trying to take care of him. Marcus, your father is my husband. I made a vow." "Mom, stop." His voice was sharp, cutting through my words like a blade. "I know about Vanessa and Dad." The coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile floor. Marcus didn't move to help me clean it up. He just stood there, watching me scramble to pick up the pieces with a detached expression that chilled me to the bone. "I don't know what you mean," I whispered, but even as the words left my lips, I knew it was pointless. "Yes, you do. Vanessa told me everything months ago. She was terrified I'd be angry. But you know what? I wasn't. I was relieved." I straightened up slowly, leaving the broken ceramic on the floor. "Relieved? Mom, look at yourself. Really look. You're 64 years old, and you look like you're 80. You've aged 10 years in the past 3. You've spent our entire inheritance on Dad's medical care, $200,000 of retirement money that should have been saved for your future. And for what? He's never going to walk again. He's never going to be the man he was." Each word felt like a physical blow. This was my son, my baby, the child I had sacrificed everything for, talking about his father like he was a burden to be discarded. "But Vanessa," Marcus continued, "she makes him happy. She gives him something to live for. And honestly, Mom, when was the last time you made him smile the way she does?" The cruelty of that question took my breath away. "Marcus, how can you say that? I've devoted my entire life to caring for your father, to this family, and that's the problem." He exploded, his voice echoing off the kitchen walls. "You've devoted your life to a man who can't even appreciate it anymore. You're wasting away, spending money we don't have for someone who's already gone." I stared at my son, this stranger who looked like the boy I had raised but spoke like someone I had never met. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time to let go. Vanessa loves Dad and he loves her. They could have a good life together, especially if—" He paused, and I saw him choose his words carefully. "Especially if they had the financial resources to really care for him properly." "You mean my life insurance money?" The words hung between us like a confession. Marcus's face didn't change, didn't show even a flicker of shame or surprise. "Mom, you're not healthy. Your heart condition is getting worse, and the stress of Dad's care is killing you. Dr. Mitchell has told you that, hasn't he? Maybe instead of fighting against the inevitable, you should think about how you want to be remembered. Do you want to be remembered as the woman who held everyone back, or as the one who made the ultimate sacrifice for the people she loved?" I felt the room spinning around me. My own son was suggesting that I should die for the convenience of his father's mistress. The child I had carried for 9 months, raised through every childhood illness, supported through college, and helped establish in his career, was standing in my kitchen, advocating for my death. "Get out," I whispered. "Mom! Get out!" I screamed, with a force that surprised us both. "Get out of my house right now!" Marcus's expression didn't change. He looked at me with the same cold calculation I had seen in Richard's face, the same detached assessment I had witnessed in Vanessa's eyes. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom, but I want you to think about what I've said. Think about what's best for everyone, not just yourself." After he left, I locked the front door and slumped against it, sobbing. The 3 people I loved most in the world had formed a conspiracy against me. They weren't just planning to benefit from my death, they were actively encouraging it. But as I sat there on my kitchen floor, surrounded by the broken pieces of my coffee cup, something hardened inside me. If Marcus thought his mother was going to quietly fade away for his convenience, he had seriously misjudged Deborah Payne. I had raised a monster, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let him destroy me. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Marcus's visit had been devastating, but it had also been incredibly revealing. Now I knew exactly where all 3 conspirators stood, and I could plan accordingly. My first call was to Harold Davidson. "Harold, I need to accelerate our timeline. Last night, my son essentially told me I should die for everyone's convenience. This has moved beyond financial fraud. They're actively encouraging my death. Deborah, I think it's time to involve Detective Sarah Chen at the Rochester Police Department. She specializes in elder abuse and financial crimes. What you're dealing with has crossed the line into criminal territory." My second call was to my sister Helen in Buffalo. Helen was 3 years younger than me, but had always been the fighter in our family. If anyone would understand what I was going through and help me figure out how to survive it, it would be Helen. "Debbie?" Helen's voice was concerned when she heard the tremor in mine. "What's wrong? You sound terrible." I told her everything. Helen listened in stunned silence, occasionally gasping or muttering curses under her breath. When I finished, there was a long pause. "That son of a bitch," she finally said. "And Marcus too? I can't believe it. Debbie, you need to get out of that house. Come stay with me until we figure out what to do." "I can't leave, Helen. If I leave, they win. They get to play house while I run away like a scared old woman. Besides, if I'm not here to monitor the situation, who knows how quickly they might escalate their plans." "Then we make our own plan," Helen said firmly. "I'm driving down there tomorrow, and we're going to document everything. If these 3 want to play games, they're about to learn that the Murphy sisters don't go down without a fight." That afternoon, Detective Chen came to my house while Richard was at physical therapy and Vanessa was supposedly running errands. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with an intensity that immediately put me at ease. This was someone who took crimes against elderly people seriously. "Mrs. Payne, what you've shown me constitutes strong evidence of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud," Detective Chen said after reviewing all my documentation. "The emails alone are enough to warrant an investigation, but I have to ask, do you feel you're in immediate physical danger?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "They seem to be hoping that stress and my heart condition will do their work for them. But Marcus's visit last night felt like an ultimatum. I'm afraid they might be getting impatient." Detective Chen nodded grimly. "I want to set up surveillance equipment in your home, hidden cameras and recording devices that will capture any conversations about their plans. But Mrs. Payne, I need you to understand, You'll essentially be acting as an undercover agent in your own home. Can you handle that? The idea terrified me, but I knew it was necessary. Detective, these people have stolen 3 years of my life while planning my death. If playing undercover agent is what it takes to stop them, then that's what I'll do. The surveillance equipment was installed the next day while Richard was at a doctor's appointment and Vanessa was at the grocery store. Tiny cameras were hidden in the living room, kitchen, and main hallway. Recording devices were placed in Richard's bedroom and my home office. Everything would be monitored remotely by the police department. Helen arrived that evening with a suitcase and a fierce determination that reminded me why we had been such formidable partners in childhood mischief. At 61, she was still striking. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob, bright blue eyes that missed nothing, and a no-nonsense attitude that had served her well in her career as a high school principal. "So these are the vultures circling my sister," she said, after meeting Richard and Vanessa. She had played her part perfectly, the concerned sister visiting to help with caregiving duties. Both Richard and Vanessa had accepted her presence without question, probably assuming she would make their ultimate goal easier to achieve. That night, after Richard had gone to sleep, Helen and I sat in my kitchen, planning our counterattack. "The way I see it," Helen said, "we have several advantages they don't know about. First, you've changed all your beneficiaries and documented everything with Harold. Second, the police are now involved and gathering evidence. Third, they think you're a helpless old woman who suspects nothing. But Helen, what if they get impatient? What if they decide to speed up their timeline?" Helen's expression grew cold. "Then they're going to discover that trying to murder a Murphy sister is the biggest mistake they could possibly make." Over the next few days, Helen and I developed a routine. She helped with Richard's care during the day, giving me time to rest and recover some of my strength. In the evenings, we reviewed the surveillance footage that Detective Chen shared with us. What we saw was both fascinating and horrifying. When they thought I was out of earshot, Richard, Vanessa, and even Marcus, who had started visiting more frequently, spoke openly about their plans. They discussed my health, my finances, and their future, together with a casual callousness that still shocked me, even knowing what I knew. But they also revealed information I hadn't known before. Vanessa was apparently in significant debt, nearly $85,000 in credit card bills from a shopping addiction she had hidden from Marcus. Richard had been helping her pay these bills with money from our joint account, money I had assumed was going to his medical expenses. Marcus, meanwhile, was facing his own financial crisis. His construction company had lost several major contracts, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. The three of them weren't just planning to profit from my death. They desperately needed that insurance money to solve their individual financial problems. "They're not just evil," Helen observed, after watching a particularly damning conversation between Vanessa and Richard. "They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." She was right, and I was about to give them the opportunity to make the biggest mistake of their lives. 2 weeks after Helen's arrival, I made an announcement that sent shockwaves through my household of conspirators. It was a Friday morning, and we were all gathered in the kitchen, Richard in his wheelchair, Vanessa preparing his breakfast, Helen reading the newspaper, and me standing by the counter with what I hoped looked like spontaneous inspiration. "I've been thinking," I said, injecting excitement into my voice. "With Helen here to help, and my health improving a bit, maybe this would be the perfect time for that second honeymoon Richard and I never got to take." The coffee pot in Vanessa's hand froze mid-pour. Richard's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Even Helen, who was in on the plan, looked up with convincing surprise. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Richard asked carefully. "I mean a real trip this time. Not just overnight to Niagara Falls, but something special. I was thinking we could take that cruise to the Caribbean we always talked about. The cruise lines have excellent accessibility accommodations now, and I've been researching medical facilities at each port." I watched Vanessa's face carefully. The panic in her eyes was unmistakable, quickly replaced by a forced smile. "That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Payne, but are you sure it's wise? I mean, with Mr. Payne's condition and your heart problems. That's exactly why we need to do it now," I said firmly. "None of us knows how much time we have left together. I want to make beautiful memories with my husband while we still can." The irony of those words, delivered to 3 people who were hoping I would die sooner rather than later, was delicious. "When were you thinking of going?" Richard asked, and I could hear the carefully controlled tension in his voice. "Next month. I've already looked at several options. There's a 2-week cruise leaving from Miami that would be perfect. Fully accessible cabins, onboard medical facilities, everything we could need. 2 weeks? Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. That's a long time to be away from home. Exactly. Time for just the two of us to reconnect and focus on our marriage. I moved to stand behind Richard's wheelchair, placing my hands on his shoulders in what probably looked like a loving gesture. Through the surveillance cameras, I knew were recording everything. It would look like a devoted wife discussing romantic plans. What the cameras couldn't capture was the way Richard's muscles tensed under my touch, or the way his jaw clenched when he thought I wasn't looking. That evening, Helen and I reviewed the surveillance footage from the day. As expected, the moment I had left for my supposed grocery shopping trip, the 3 conspirators had gone into panic mode. "A cruise?" Vanessa had said to Richard, pacing frantically around the living room. "For 2 weeks? Richard, we can't let that happen." "I know," Richard had replied grimly. "If she's gone for 2 weeks, and if something happens to her on that ship, the investigation would be too thorough. Too many witnesses, too much documentation. We need her to have her incident here, at home, where everything can be controlled." Marcus, who had arrived within an hour of my departure, had been even more direct. "We need to move up our timeline. If Mom goes on this cruise and actually has a good time, she might start taking better care of her health. She might live for years longer than we planned." "How much longer can we realistically wait?" Vanessa had asked. "Not long," Richard had answered. "Her next cardiology appointment is in 2 weeks. If Dr. Mitchell adjusts her medication again or recommends any new treatments, it could complicate things significantly. We need to act before then." Watching my husband, my son, and my daughter-in-law discuss the optimal timing for my death while sitting in my living room was surreal. But it also gave me exactly what I needed: a clear deadline and specific threats that Detective Chen could use to make arrests. "They're going to move within the next 2 weeks, I told Detective Chen when I called her that night. "Probably within the next few days, before my cardiology appointment." "Are you sure you want to continue with this, Mrs. Payne? We have enough evidence now to arrest all 3 of them. You don't have to keep putting yourself at risk. Detective, if I don't see this through, if we don't catch them in the actual act of trying to harm me, a good lawyer might be able to get them reduced charges. I want them to face the full consequences of what they've planned. Then we need to be ready. I'm going to have undercover officers positioned around your house 24/7. The moment they make any move against you, we'll intervene." The next morning, I announced that I had booked our cruise for the following week. "I found a last-minute cancellation," I told Richard and Vanessa. "Isn't that exciting? We leave next Saturday." The look of pure desperation that passed between them was everything I had hoped for. They were out of time, and they knew it. That afternoon, Vanessa suggested that she stay overnight to help me pack for the trip. "With your heart condition, you shouldn't be doing all that physical exertion alone," she said with false concern. "That's so thoughtful of you, dear," I replied. "Helen can help too. It'll be like a little slumber party." What I didn't say was that I knew this would be the night they would try to kill me. The surveillance cameras would capture everything. Detective Chen's team would be watching, and finally, the nightmare would be over. As I helped Richard into bed that night, he squeezed my hand with what might have been genuine emotion. "Deborah, I want you to know that no matter what happens, you've been a good wife to me." Those words might have been the closest thing to a confession I was going to get from him, because we both knew that after tonight, everything would change forever. The house felt different that night. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Vanessa had indeed stayed over, setting up a sleeping bag in the living room under the pretense of helping me pack early in the morning. Helen had retired to the guest room, playing her part as the tired sister who wanted to get a good night's sleep before the travel preparations began. But none of us were sleeping. I lay in my bed, still fully dressed under my nightgown, with my cell phone in my hand and Detective Chen's direct number ready to dial. Through the walls, I could hear muffled voices from the living room, Vanessa and Richard having a conversation they thought no one else could hear. At 1:15 a.m., my bedroom door opened slowly. In the darkness, I could see Vanessa's silhouette, moving with careful, deliberate steps toward my bed. In her hand was something that glinted in the moonlight coming through my window. I forced myself to breathe slowly and steadily, maintaining the illusion of deep sleep. Through barely opened eyes, I watched as Vanessa approached my bedside. She was holding a syringe. "Mrs. Payne," she whispered softly. When I didn't respond, she leaned closer. "Mrs. Payne, are you awake?" I remained perfectly still, even as every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to fight, to call for help. But I needed her to commit to this action. I needed the cameras to capture everything. Vanessa sat carefully on the edge of my bed, her weight causing the mattress to dip slightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and for a moment, I almost believed there was genuine remorse in her voice. "But you'll finally be at peace. No more pain, no more worry about taking care of Richard. And we'll take such good care of him, I promise." She reached for my arm, searching for a vein. The syringe in her other hand was filled with what I assumed was a lethal dose of something, probably insulin, which would be difficult to detect in an elderly diabetic woman's system and would mimic a heart attack. Just as the needle touched my skin, the house exploded with activity. "Police! Freeze!" Detective Chen and her team burst through the front door and my bedroom door simultaneously, flooding the room with blinding light. Vanessa screamed and dropped the syringe, which shattered on the hardwood floor. "Vanessa Morrison, you are under arrest for attempted murder," Detective Chen announced as officers restrained my would-be killer. "You have the right to remain silent." In the chaos that followed, I heard Helen's voice from the living room. "Richard Payne, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud." Richard's wheelchair-bound protests echoed through the house as additional officers took him into custody. But it was Marcus's arrest that truly broke my heart. When the police brought him in from his car outside, where he had been waiting as the lookout, he looked directly at me with an expression of pure hatred. "You set us up," he said, his voice filled with venom. "Your own family. How could you do this to us?" I stared at my son, this man I had raised and loved, who had just been complicit in an attempt to murder me for money. "How could I do this to you? Marcus, you were planning to profit from my death. You encouraged me to die for your convenience. We gave you a chance to do the right thing," he shot back as the officers led him away. "We gave you a chance to think about what was best for everyone." Those were the last words my son spoke to me before they put him in the police car. As the paramedics checked my blood pressure and pulse, Detective Chen sat beside me on the bed. "The syringe contained a lethal dose of insulin," she said quietly. "If you hadn't been wearing the wire, and if we hadn't been watching, you would have died tonight. Your daughter-in-law is a very convincing actress, but not convincing enough." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Now they face the consequences. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud. They're looking at significant prison time. The evidence we've gathered over the past few weeks, combined with what happened tonight, makes this an airtight case. Helen appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "How are you holding up, sis?" "I'm alive," I said simply. "For the first time in months, I know I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning." As the police finished processing the scene and removing my family members in handcuffs, I sat in my living room with Helen, staring at the broken syringe on my bedroom floor, visible through the doorway, the physical evidence of how close I had come to death. "Do you regret it?" Helen asked, "turning in your own family?" I thought about that for a long moment. 3 years of sacrifice, 40 years of marriage, 37 years of motherhood. All of it had led to this moment where my loved ones had tried to kill me for money. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it came to this. I regret that the people I loved most in the world were capable of such betrayal. But I don't regret surviving. I don't regret fighting back. The nightmare was finally over. But my real life, the life I was going to build for myself, free from the people who had been planning my death, was just beginning." The trial began 6 months later, on a crisp October morning that reminded me of new beginnings. The courtroom in downtown Rochester was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and the few family members who still spoke to me, mainly Helen and my cousin Margaret, who had driven down from Syracuse to show support. Prosecutor Maria Santos had built a case that was both methodical and devastating. The surveillance footage was played for the jury, showing Richard, Vanessa, and Marcus discussing my death with the casual indifference one might use to plan a grocery list. The emails were read aloud, each message more damning than the last. The financial records painted a clear picture of 3 people drowning in debt who saw my life insurance policy as their salvation. but it was the video from that final night that truly sealed their fate. Watching Vanessa approach my bed with a lethal syringe while whispering false comfort was evidence that no defense attorney could explain away. Richard's lawyer tried to argue that his client's judgment had been impaired by depression following his stroke, that he hadn't been thinking clearly. The prosecutor countered by showing that the planning had been methodical and detailed, spanning nearly a year of careful preparation. Vanessa's defense team claimed she had been manipulated by an older, more experienced Richard, that she was simply a young woman caught up in a situation she couldn't control. The jury didn't buy it, especially when they heard the recording of her suggesting ways to accelerate my timeline through increased stress. Marcus's attorney took perhaps the most desperate approach, arguing that he had only been trying to help his family through a difficult financial situation. When the prosecutor played the recording of Marcus telling me I should think about what's best for everyone, not just yourself, several jury members visibly recoiled. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the entire ordeal from the moment I discovered their affair to the night Vanessa tried to inject me with insulin. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but also oddly liberating. For the first time, I was able to tell the complete truth about what my family had put me through. The cross-examinations were brutal. Defense attorneys tried to portray me as a vindictive woman who had set up her own family out of jealousy and spite. They suggested that I had misinterpreted innocent conversations and blown a simple affair out of proportion. But Detective Chen's testimony about the surveillance evidence was unshakable, and Harold Davidson's documentation of my changed beneficiaries proved that I had been trying to protect myself, not seeking revenge. The verdicts came back after just 2 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Richard was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. At 67 years old and in his physical condition, it was essentially a life sentence. As the judge read the verdict, Richard stared straight ahead, never once looking in my direction. Vanessa received 18 years for attempted murder and conspiracy charges. She broke down sobbing as the bailiff led her away, finally showing the emotion that had been missing from her calculated performance over the past year. Marcus, my son, my baby, the child I had raised from birth, received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. As they handcuffed him, he finally looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy I had once known. But then his expression hardened again, and he was led away without a word. The media coverage was intense, but not entirely unwelcome. My story became a cautionary tale about elder abuse and family financial manipulation, but it also became an inspiring narrative about fighting back against those who would exploit the elderly. I received hundreds of letters from people sharing their own stories of family betrayal and expressing admiration for my courage in seeking justice. Helen moved in with me permanently, and we began the process of rebuilding our lives. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the traumatic memories it held. We redecorated Richard's bedroom, turning it into a craft room where Helen could pursue her passion for quilting, and I could return to the watercolor painting I had abandoned years ago when caregiving consumed my life. I also started volunteering with Detective Chen's department, speaking to groups about recognizing signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. My story had the power to educate and protect other vulnerable seniors, and I was determined to use it for something positive. The $750,000 life insurance policy that had been at the center of so much evil became a force for good. I donated half of it to establish a foundation for stroke victims and their families, ensuring that other caregivers would have resources I hadn't had access to during Richard's illness. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the relationship I began building with some of Richard's genuine friends from his recovery group. These were people who had known the man I married, not the person he had become, and they helped me remember that the Richard who had planned my death wasn't the only Richard who had existed. One of them, a widower named Frank, who had also survived a stroke, became a close friend and eventually something more. At 65, I discovered that it wasn't too late for companionship, laughter, and even love that wasn't tainted by manipulation or betrayal. "Do you ever regret it?" Frank asked me one evening as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset. "Fighting back the way you did?" I thought about his question carefully. 3 members of my family were in prison because of my actions. My son would be in his 50s before he was eligible for parole. My marriage of 40 years had ended in betrayal and criminal conviction. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that the people I loved most were capable of such cruelty. But I don't regret surviving. I don't regret refusing to be a victim. As I looked out at the street where I had lived for 20 years, where I had raised Marcus and built a life with Richard, I realized that this was still my home. I hadn't let them drive me away. I had reclaimed it, cleaned it of their toxic presence, and made it mine again. At 65, I had learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to fight for yourself, and never too late to discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined. Today marks 2 years since that terrible night when Vanessa tried to end my life with a syringe full of insulin. As I sit in my garden, watching the roses I planted last spring bloom in brilliant reds and yellows, I can hardly believe how much my life has changed. This morning I received a letter from the parole board. Vanessa's first attempt at early release had been denied. She'll serve at least another 8 years before she's eligible to try again. Richard's appeal was also denied last month. At 69 and confined to a wheelchair, he'll likely die in prison. As for Marcus, he's learned to make furniture in the prison workshop and apparently excels at it. I've heard he's a model prisoner, but he's never written to me, never asked for visits, never expressed any remorse for what he put me through. I no longer feel anger toward any of them. That emotion was too heavy to carry for very long. Instead, I feel something closer to pity. Pity for people who lost their way so completely that they were willing to murder for money. People who threw away their freedom and their souls for a life insurance policy that they never would have received anyway. The foundation I started with part of that insurance money has grown beyond my wildest expectations. The Deborah Payne Foundation for Stroke Survivors and Family Support has helped over 300 families in the Rochester area access resources for long-term care, emotional support, and financial counseling. We've prevented at least a dozen cases of elder financial abuse by educating families about warning signs and connecting vulnerable seniors with legal advocates. Helen and I have become something of a team, traveling to speak at conferences about elder abuse and family fraud. My story has been featured in documentaries, news articles, and even a book about financial crimes against the elderly. Each time I tell it, I hope that somewhere, another person in a similar situation will recognize the warning signs and take action before it's too late. Frank and I were married last spring, a small ceremony in my backyard with Helen as my maid of honor and Detective Chen as an honored guest. At 66, I discovered that love doesn't have to be complicated, manipulative, or dangerous. Sometimes it can be as simple as finding someone who genuinely enjoys your company and wants nothing more than to share quiet evenings and Sunday morning crossword puzzles with you. We took that Caribbean cruise I had originally planned with Richard, the one that had caused such panic among my would-be killers. Frank navigated the ship in his own wheelchair. He's partially paralyzed on his left side from his stroke, and we laughed about being the rolling couple on the dance floor. It was everything a second honeymoon should be: peaceful, joyful, and free from any agenda other than enjoying each other's company. The house has been completely transformed. We knocked down the wall between Richard's old bedroom and my craft room, creating a beautiful studio where I've returned to painting with a passion I hadn't felt in decades. My watercolors now hang in a local gallery, and I've sold several pieces, donating the proceeds to the foundation. Helen's quilts have won awards at county fairs, and she's teaching classes to other seniors at the community center. We've also turned the basement into a safe room of sorts, not because we expect more family members to try to murder us, but because our experiences have taught us the value of being prepared. It's equipped with secure communications, backup medications, and emergency supplies. Detective Chen helped us design it, half joking that it was probably overkill, but understanding our need to feel secure in our own home. The media attention has died down, but I still receive letters regularly from people who have read or heard my story. Some are from other abuse survivors, thanking me for speaking out. Others are from family members who recognized warning signs in their own situations and took preventive action. A few have been from people who discovered financial fraud or manipulation before it escalated to threats of violence. One letter particularly touched me. It was from a woman whose brother had been systematically stealing from their elderly mother's accounts. The woman had read about my case and realized that her brother's caretaking was actually financial exploitation. She contacted authorities, and her brother was arrested before he could drain their mother's life savings completely. "Your courage gave me the strength to save my mother," she wrote. "I hope you know that your terrible experience has prevented others from going through the same thing." That letter is framed in my studio, a reminder that even the worst experiences in life can be transformed into something meaningful if we have the courage to share them. I've also reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the caregiving years. Women from my nursing career, neighbors from Marcus's childhood, college roommates I hadn't spoken to in decades. They've all reached out after seeing my story in the news. It's been healing to rebuild those connections and remember who I was before I became defined by caregiving, betrayal, and survival. Last month, I did something I never thought I would do. I visited Marcus in prison. It was Helen's idea, and at first, I resisted strongly, but she convinced me that I needed closure, and perhaps he did too. The visit was awkward and painful. Marcus looked older, grayer, and seemed genuinely shocked that I had come. We sat across from each other in the visiting room, struggling to find words for nearly 10 minutes before he finally spoke. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again," he said quietly. "I didn't think I would either," I admitted. "But I needed to see you, to see how you were doing." "Why? After everything I put you through? Why would you care?" I looked at this man, my son, my former would-be killer, this stranger who shared my DNA, and realized that despite everything, some part of me would always love the child he had been, even if I could never forgive the man he had become. "Because you're still my son," I said simply. "Not the son I raised, not the son I thought I knew, but my son nonetheless." We talked for about 30 minutes. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. He didn't express remorse for planning my death. I hadn't expected that either. But he did ask about my health, about Helen, about whether I was happy. When I told him about Frank, about the foundation, about my art, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across his face. "I'm glad," he said, as our time was ending. "I'm glad you're okay. I haven't decided whether I'll visit again." The closure I was seeking remains elusive, and perhaps that's how it should be. Some betrayals are simply too profound to heal completely, and that's a truth I've learned to accept. As I finish writing this account of the most difficult period of my life, I want to end with a message for anyone who might be facing a similar situation. If you suspect that family members or caregivers are exploiting or manipulating an elderly loved one, trust your instincts. If you are an elderly person being pressured, manipulated, or threatened by people who claim to love you, know that you have options and you have allies. Document everything. Seek legal advice. Contact law enforcement if necessary. And remember that it's never too late to fight for yourself, no matter how hopeless the situation might seem. I'm 67 years old now, and I've discovered that this chapter of my life, the post-betrayal, post-survival chapter, is filled with possibilities I never could have imagined when I was trapped in that house with 3 people who wanted me dead. To everyone watching this story, wherever you are in the world, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about the struggles of an elderly woman in Rochester, New York, who refused to go quietly into the night. Your attention, your support, and your engagement with this story help ensure that others won't have to face similar betrayals alone. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and most importantly, share your location and the time where you're watching from in the comments below. Knowing that my story is reaching people around the world gives me hope that together we can protect vulnerable seniors and prevent these tragedies from happening to other families. Remember, you are never too old to start over, never too vulnerable to fight back, and never too alone to seek help. My name is Deborah Payne. I'm 67 years old, and I'm living proof that survival is possible, justice is achievable, and happiness can be reclaimed, even after the deepest betrayal imaginable. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, your story isn't over until you decide it is.